about methods, so kind of, okay, the reason why I like this chapter following the sensationalism one, the media one, is this is kind of like the chapter that says, well, okay, you get all that inaccurate information in chapter 5 from the media, and this chapter is teaching you where do we get real accurate information about drugs. So there's different methods, which are just approaches that are systematic approaches. You know what systematic means? That they follow a logic and steps. So there's systematic approaches to the research that gets us good information about drugs. And I'm going to go through different ways that we get this information. First of all, when we want to estimate drug use, now just in general, I hope that you have taken, if you've taken more than one sociology class, I hope that you've learned that sociological research has a lot of problems and it's never perfect. You know that, right? There are always problems with gathering information. So just, and so with drugs, one of the problems with gathering information is that a lot of people don't want to talk about it. Because, well, they talk about it, but they underestimate how much drugs they use because it's kind of like an embarrassing thing. And so people lie about their drug use, meaning that whether it's legal or illegal, because we don't, as a society, we see it as deviant. And when they do lie, it's important to note that they underestimate. Why do you think they underestimate? Why would you underestimate if you're embarrassed about something? Right, to save face. Right, to feel better about themselves, right? So recreational drug use is illegal, you know, for the most part, unless it's alcohol and cigarettes. And
Yeah.
but people feel embarrassed, so they're going to underestimate how much drugs they use. So this is a problem with drug research, but here's how it isn't such a big problem. It's a problem, but one of the things is all people, well, at least in the United States, they argue that all people lie equally, that men and women lie equally, that people of different ethnic groups lie equally. So if everybody's lying equally, can I compare across different ethnic groups in terms of how much drugs they're using? If everybody's lying equally. Yeah,
To save
right?
face,
So
to make themselves
you can,
look
Daniel,
like,
because if you're lying as much, let's pretend that everybody lies about 5%. So they'll tell you 5% less on average. Okay? So Daniel, if you lie 5% and I lie 5% less, and we both say we smoke 5% less cigarettes, they can still compare me and you, right? Because we're lying at the same rate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? We're all lying together at the same rate. So then we can kind of compare, because if I smoke 10 cigarettes and I lie 50%, right? And you smoke 20 and lie 50%, who's still the bigger smoker? You are, right? So we call that, you guys get it what I'm saying? So that we call that reporting errors cancel each other out, because everybody lies equally. Is there a slide on that? No. So let me write it in here. So we call that reporting errors cancel each other out, because we all lie equally, roughly equally. You know what I'm saying? So across gender, well, it's like there's different ways you can tell if people are lying. So one thing you can do is you could say on average people lie equally. So what they do is they'll have people report their drug use, okay? And then they'll give them another form, like a biological measure. So for smoking research, what we did in China, because we wanted to see if people were lying, we gave them a survey where we asked them to report, have you ever smoked or whatever. And then we gave a small sample, a subsample, this saliva test, which would indicate whether or not they had smoked in the past 30 days. So we could compare the question that said, had you smoked a cigarette in the past 30 days, with the swab. And we would, you see what I'm saying? And that's how we can see how much lying is going on. And so there's physiological measures you can use to see if people are lying. But I mean, it's like on average, everybody lies equally. Like they haven't found that, you know, white Americans lie way, way more than any other ethnic group, or that, for example, women lie on average way, way more than men about their drug use. Does that make sense? Okay. So one other thing is, but I'll tell you, if you compare across country, they do find that we found that people in China lie more, kids in China lied more than other groups. And there's a reason for that. So I'm just talking about, when I say everyone lies equally, I'm talking about within the United States on average. But when we went to China, we found that there was a lot more lying going around. And that was because the government is very different in China. It's a lot more controlling. You follow what I'm saying? So like, you know, there's some governments, like I know in Middle Eastern countries, you send them your mail, right? You send a letter to your uncle or something, and it gets opened, and someone reads it, you know, and it's just like random. They do stuff like that. They survey their people a lot more heavily in their personal business. You know what I'm talking about? So if they do that, the culture, people are a little more paranoid, right? Because somebody can say, like in the United States, you can pretty much guarantee that if somebody says, hey, I'm not going to look at this survey at school, do you feel like they're really going to look at it? You guys paranoid about that? I don't think so. Right. And I don't think they have the same kind of expectations from their government, so we found that they actually lied more. But let's go back to the United States and what we talk about in the United States. So in the United States, everybody lies equally across gender. When I say across gender, I mean that men and women, right? That across gender just means men in comparison to women. So across gender, across ethnic groups. Across ethnic groups just means, you know, across the different ethnic groups. African Americans, whites, Native Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, they all lie equally. Okay? So social groups. And also another place where they say everybody lies equally is pretty much over time. Right? People lie equally over time, meaning that in 1970 they were probably lying as much as we are today in 2011. And it's important. Why is it important to kind of hope that everybody lies equally over time? Because one big thing that we want to do is we want to compare across time. When we're looking at drugs, right, we want to see, are people using more drugs in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on and so forth, right? Because that's a big thing for us, is looking at drug trends. Right, everybody? Okay, so we got...
Yes.
Reporting errors cancel each other out. Okay. Okay. So, all right, so let's look at the different types of statistics that we can get. A lot of movement, Derek. I'm going to, can you mute your audio, and then when you talk, turn it on? Just a lot of movement. No, it's okay. It's just easier on everybody. Thank you. And then when you want to talk, you can just turn it on, raise your hand, or turn it on. Okay, so there's two methods for obtaining drug use information in general. Okay, there's two types of statistics. You know what statistics means, right? Numbers, right? Okay, so there's official statistics and unofficial statistics. So let's go through them. Okay, first of all, official statistics before you get all caught up in that definition. Official statistics are basically statistics gathered in the everyday procedures of some kind of organization. So, for example, you know the police station? They collect statistics. They have statistical information because they have information on robberies and burglaries and crime because, like, that stuff's just coming in all day, right? Hospitals have information about stuff that includes drug use because sometimes people come in with the ill effects of drugs, right? So that kind of information is collected in the day-to-day procedures of the hospital, in the day-to-day procedures of the police department. The morgue, right? They have information that they collect for the purposes of their organization that could be very interesting to people who want to study drugs. So I could say to the guy at the morgue, hey, I want to look at your stats. I want to see how many people had this in their system and that drug in their system when they died. Yeah. Even though he's not collecting it for me to do research on, I can actually use it to do research and learn important information about drugs. Does that make sense? So that's kind of like an indirect. So it's an indirect way because we're not really, it's kind of like what we would call secondary data analysis. We're not really, we're just using that information because it's there, but it wasn't collected for my research question. I'm just using it to inform my research question. So I put down, so my definition here is statistics gathered on drug use as a result of the day-to-day organizational procedures conducted by the government or agencies of the government. So I put police, hospitals, medical reports. They have stuff on the sale of psychoactive drugs and prescription drugs, and all of that stuff are records that we can look at, which I would say are more indirect measures. Does this make sense? So when you're using these indirect measures, they have some flaws because they weren't designed specifically to answer the question you have in mind, so you have to kind of work around what they have. We'll talk about some of those issues. So remember, the key is with official statistics, you really have to work around them and what they have. Yesenia, do you know what I mean by that? Okay, what do I mean? I'm not quizzing you. I'm just trying to see if I'm communicating clearly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Good. Perfect. That means that Dr. Shakib is doing her job. I love that. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to ask, that's why I asked you guys to repeat it, because I'm trying to check and make sure that I'm explaining it. Okay. The second type of statistics known as unofficial statistics. And unofficial statistics are basically statistics that, like a researcher, so Dr. Shakib, or they actually have some huge national think tank places where all these professors and researchers go, PhDs, and their whole purpose is to put up to create research projects aimed at answering specific questions about drugs. Does this make sense? So they all sit around in a room and they say, okay, this is our hypothesis. How do we want to, this is what we want to know about drugs. How do we go about answering this question? Oh, let's design a survey, or let's design a research project. So it can be very, very specific to what they want. Does this make sense? And there's a bunch of surveys that everybody gets their statistics from that are very well known. And, well, these are two. I'm going to talk about the two most important ones, which is Monitoring the Future and the National Household Survey. These are huge surveys. There's all sorts of different ones that are done that, like the Center for Disease Control. You guys heard of that, right? The CDC. And, they're the people who talk about bird flu or whatever they call. You've ever seen the people from the Center for Disease Control?
Yeah.
Okay. It's in Atlanta, and it's a government agency, and the government agency will put out a research grant, right? And they might say, oh, I want people to study smoking in certain communities. That would be an unofficial statistic, even though it's part of the government. They also have their own survey called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, where they track for years and years and years teen drug use. So they have their own,
I've heard
and
of it.
So there's many different places that we're going to talk about that are unofficial. When I was at USC, you can write a grant. The government will give you money to study a particular group. They might say, oh, we don't know enough about this group. And then as a research team, you could say, okay, well, we'll study that. And then there are these ongoing, solid Monitoring the Future, National Household Survey, and Youth Risk Behavior Survey that have been going on for eons, and look at these huge samples. So you can click, if you typed in the National Household Survey, you can actually find the latest, most accurate information on drug use on the web just by searching that. And they put out information for the public and all of that. Okay? But we're going to talk more about them later. So one thing that I want to talk about, no, you don't have to work on these research projects. No, you don't have to have a PhD to do it. There's lots of different ways you could work on research projects. Like, are you interested in like the drug research stuff, or like working? Let me see what he says. Well, if you were trying to, there's a lot of PhDs who work on them. It depends on what you want to do. So sometimes they'll have somebody who's like a data analyst, or someone who, I would say mostly like it would be a master's or PhD that would look at, probably a PhD would be in charge of like designing the question. But they have people who got, like National Household Survey, they come to your house. So you don't have to be a PhD to interview. But there are very interesting studies. If you want to get involved, we can talk about it. Like there's one by Carl Sneed that's on right now. That's sponsored by the CDC. It's not on drugs. Are you only interested in drugs? Well, let's do this, Derek. Let's talk about it more, because I can try to, there's other studies that I know of and stuff, and I can, maybe one-on-one we could discuss it. But I have a lot of friends, yeah, who have, you could send me an email, who have studies, and sometimes they want people to help them with them. So we could talk about that. Okay. So, yeah, student involvement. Students can get involved in these projects as well. Okay, so let's go to, so we're going to talk about all this research, and they all have flaws. Official have flaws, and unofficial have flaws, okay? Because all research has flaws, right? Research is not perfect. If research were perfect, the world would be a perfect place, and it's not. Okay, so let me just go over a couple terms before we get in there. Okay, remember I was telling you about, because Elise, I think it was Elise, asked me, how do they know if people are lying, or was that, I can't remember who that was that asked me. How do we know if people are lying? And I said, we give a swab in the mouth, right? And then we ask them a survey. That process of using two data points, meaning the survey, the questionnaire, and then the swab, is called triangulation. That's when we examine data, so smoking data, relative to other data about smoking. So it's just a fancy way of saying using more than one data source to answer a question about drug use. So you can triangulate data by using a swab and asking a question to see, right, if you're going to get a similar answer. You can triangulate data by using another physiological measure like a blood sample or a urine sample and see if that is similar to what the person reports. Another thing that we call triangulation is sometimes maybe a survey will tell us how often people are using drugs, but we don't know really why they're using them. So we might want to interview people about what causes them to want to use drugs. So you could conduct like face-to-face detailed interviews with people to learn information about that. So triangulation could be using many different methods. We also, in the field of drugs, we don't really go to one data source to get all our information about drugs. We try to use multiple data sources. But triangulation is really this idea of using more than one source to answer a question. So a couple key terms that we just need to talk about in this chapter that are really important when you're talking about drug use is one is called the word epidemiology. Have you heard of this? If you're really into research and you're interested in drugs and stuff, you could become an epidemiologist. An epidemiologist is a person who studies the spread and distribution of a disease. So patterns, looking at the patterns of a disease. So I'll give you an example. Well, wasn't there the first epidemiologist that everybody thinks about was this guy who, do you hear about the guy, everybody was getting sick, some sort of, in the 1400s, they were getting some kind of bacterial infection? Did you guys ever hear about this in one of your classes? And okay, well, it was getting bacterial infection of some sort. And nobody understood like what was happening. People were dying. So this one guy studied the epidemiology of this disease, and he was looking at, well, what is the pattern? Who's getting it? Okay? So he went around and like talked to all the people who knew people who got the disease and died, and he said, okay, well, where do they work? Okay, and he found out that there were patterns, that all the people in common who died of this disease had drunken from a similar water pump. And so he was able then to say, wow, this water pump is killing people. It's full of bacteria. So that's why it's important to study, if you study the spread and distribution, like who's getting it and what the pattern is, you can kind of figure out, you know, maybe what's causing it or maybe what's causing it to increase. HIV is a very similar example. When I was in I think I was in like the 7th grade. It was the 70s. I had a friend whose father was a physician, and he was a, what do you call that? You know those doctors that, internist. You know internists? Internists are famous for trying to figure out what's wrong with you, right? Those are the doctors you go to when you don't know what's wrong with you. You ever been to an internist? Because they kind of look at your blood. They do a lot of tests. They're, he probably is an internist, Dr. House, I think, isn't he? Is he an internal medicine guy? My husband watches that show, so I've seen him in the background. But anyway, so you go to these internists, and so anyway, he was an internist. And she said to me, my dad's seeing a lot of people who are coming to his office who have this serious disease and they don't know what it is and they're all getting sick and it's called AIDS. And I was like, really? And she said, but what's interesting is they're all gay men. So they studied and they found out that how HIV, where was HIV going? At that it was AIDS, and they looked and they said, okay, it's spreading among gay men, right? And it's spreading among, and then they noticed, well, all the other people who aren't gay who are getting it, or are gay too, are IV drug users. So that signaled there must be something about the lifestyle of these groups, right? That's causing this disease to spread these groups. So that is the field of epidemiology, and they found that it was blood-to-blood contact with blood. So if you're using a needle, right, you can spread HIV because you have a needle with someone who has HIV. You're injecting it into your blood. And with anal sex, which is more common among gay men, I guess there's a lot of rupture and that kind of thing. And also people who had like herpes were getting it more because there's more blood, right? Making sense? So that's what epidemiology is. So epidemiology is like interesting because you're studying the patterns. Pattern of disease. You guys good about that? You know what it is? Okay. So let's talk about etiology. Okay, so before I go any further, let me just say one more thing I forgot. So if I wanted to look at the epidemiology of drug use, I can look at patterns, and we're going to look at patterns today. So I'm going to show you some patterns about how does drug use spread among men and women, how is drug use spread among different ethnic groups, how is it related to education, that kind of stuff. So those are some patterns. So epidemiologist is somebody who does this kind of work. You can become an epidemiologist by getting a degree in public health. Okay, it's called you can even get a master's in public health. Epidemiologists are good at statistics. Etiology, remember we were talking a lot about theories? Do you remember we were talking about a lot about theories the other day? So theories are kind of like explanations about why something happens, right? So I have this theory that maybe people who were treated poorly as children and are trying to compensate in later life go on to use drugs, right? So I'm trying to understand the cause. So that would be an example of the etiology, right? I would think that that could be the etiology neglect during childhood may be the etiology of drug use. So etiology is just the study of the causes, and we talked a lot about poverty, right, as a cause in one of our studies, right? What other theories did we talk about that might cause labeling as an etiology? What were some other stuff that we talked about? Social learning as a cause, nature as a cause. So those are all like, that's basically just saying the etiology. That's all it means. So what causes HIV? What causes crime? What causes drug use? That's etiology. Simple, right? Why do men use more drugs than women? That would be a theory, so etiology. Okay. When we talk about drug use, we use this word prevalence to describe how common it is. Have you heard me use the word prevalence? Do you know what, do you use that word ever? Prevalence? Yeah, because we'll be like, oh, it's highly prevalent, right? Right? Just a common word that we use. And in drug use, it's actually a technical term or a part of their jargon, you know? Prevalence just means how many individuals have a disease at a given point in time. What's the prevalence of AIDS right now in the United States? How many people have it? And usually they say prevalence is a raw number, but a lot of times when we talk about it, it's actually a percentage, but I want you to know that it's considered a raw number, but we also use it to describe a percentage. So like if I say, what's the prevalence of smoking in this classroom, and let's say I have 50 people and half of them are smoking, the prevalence would be 25. Right? So that's a raw number. Do you guys know what I mean when I say a raw number? Right, not manipulated in any way. The actual count. That's a good way to put it. I will write that down because that's a nice way. I like that. Right, actual count. So it's unmanipulated, it's an actual count. Why is an actual count not so great sometimes? Well, I can think of an example. Remember we were talking about on Wednesday, we were talking about
like
that study where the government was trying to say that heroin use had doubled and therefore we should all be freaked out about it. And then when we went back and looked at the study, heroin use had doubled, but it was from like 14 to like 24 or something. Remember? So by using that raw number, it's not going to tell me out of how many people. Like they didn't use a raw number, so that's not a good example actually. So hold on a second. It is a good example, but not for what I'm trying to say because it's going to get confusing. Okay, let me give you a better example. Let's say that I have 25 African Americans. Okay, well let's say 30.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say my population is 60 whites. Okay, and then I have 10 Native Americans. If I tell you the prevalence of smoking among Native Americans is 10, and the prevalence among whites is 10, and the prevalence among African Americans is 10, do I know if I just give you the raw number, do I know which group smokes more? Right. You don't. So, good answer. So if I tell you that 30 African American, if I give you the information, well, 10 out of 30 African Americans smoke, and 10 out of 60 African Americans smoke, and 10 out of 10 Native Americans smoke, I can easily tell you that the Native Americans have a bigger smoking problem, right? So prevalence, if it's not adjusted for the number in the population, can be very misleading. To just give you a raw number. So in general, in sociology, right, we want to talk about, because a lot of times in sociology we're comparing men and women, You know what I mean? We're comparing different groups. So we kind of want to adjust that number for the prevalence. Sorry, this alarm is going off in my house because my husband's testing it. Is it irritating? It'll go away. Oh, good. Okay, so does that make sense why prevalence is kind of useless unless you, if you're trying to compare across groups? You follow what I'm saying? Do you guys follow, or do you want me to type it into the box? I think you guys get it. Okay, cool. Okay, so what they generally do is, well, okay, after prevalence, there's this term incidence. I'll just give this to you, but then we'll get into, we'll talk again about prevalence. Incidence is just the number of people who acquire a disease at a given time.
Yeah.
Incidence is like a test question about this thing, about the raw number, you mean, Derek? Like, how would I ask you about prevalence? Well, it's like when I ask somebody about prevalence, I think the thing to remember here is that if you have a raw number, that you can't compare across groups. And you can't compare across time because it doesn't address changes in the population and changes in differences in the population of groups. African Americans are 12% of the population. So if I'm going to compare African Americans' drug use with white American drug use, I have to adjust for the fact I have to convert it into a percentage. So out of 100 African Americans and compare out of 100 white Americans, right? I can't, to really understand and compare. You see what I mean? So that's the key thing. So that's why you can't use a raw number. But I use the word prevalence. Here's the confusing part is I always use the word prevalence when I'm talking about a percentage anyway. But I want you to know that it's really supposed to be a raw number. But we talk about prevalence as a percentage, but it's defined as a raw number in the book. Okay. So incidence is just the number of people who acquire a disease at a given time. So, like, for example, what is the incidence of drug use? What is the incidence of smoking? How many new smokers do we have? It could be any given time that I decide, in the year, in the past 10 years, in the past 5 years. You know, usually with crime and stuff, they'll talk about incident, or with a disease that's new. You know, is the incidence of heroin use going up? Right? Is the number of people who are acquiring this heroin addiction increasing? Does that make sense? That will tell me, like, oh, okay, maybe there's some reason. Is it coming in from another country, another area? Okay, so let's go back to, those are some examples you can look at. Okay, so this is kind of what I already just said. The problems with using, and I would put the word raw right here, is that it doesn't tell us how persuasive or widespread the problem is. And then I know I just went through it, so we don't have to go through it again. But if you wanted to, you could refer to the slide when you're studying, just to make sure, because it provides you with another example. Okay, so what we tend to do, or what is the most important and makes the most sense when we're comparing in sociology, is this idea of percentage. Percentages, and everybody always asks me, well, Dr. Shakib, what was my test score? And I always try to tell them you have to convert it into a percent, right? If you have a 43 points, what we do is we convert it, we pretend that it's out of 100, right? You guys know how to do a percent, right? Percent is just like making everything per unit of 100. So let me think of an example. Bless you. Percentage is like if I get a, I need my, if I had my calculator. Okay, if I get a, who has a calculator? If I get a 36 out of 48 points, what is my, what percentage is that? Do you have your calculator? Okay. Right, so is that a, okay, so it's, and then you multiply by 100 to make, and it's 75%. right? So we've converted that, we've pretended that instead of taking a test that was 48 points, we've pretended that it's 100, right? So we just multiplied. So what would that be if it were 100 points? Does this make sense? Okay, so we do the same thing with different ethnic groups when we're comparing, or men and women. There are different numbers, so we say out of 100 women, out of 100 men, how many are smokers? So here's an example of how to do a percentage. So a percentage is always out of 100, out of 100 people or 100 points. Okay? Okay, and that's how we look at, when we look at smoking and all the stuff I'm going to show you, it's a percentage. Okay? Like, so I'll show you a slide and I'll say, like, I don't know, 50% of the population has tried alcohol. I think it's more, alcohol is much higher, but let's just say 45% of all teens have tried alcohol. That would be 45 out of 100 teens. Okay, so sometimes we tend to use percentages, but you'll see when we get to the drug heroin, and I think meth, maybe, you'll see that 1 out of 100 people haven't used heroin. So if 1 out of 100 people haven't used heroin, it starts to get annoying because you have to do like decimal points. Like, it's not, you can't find 1 out of 100 heroin addicts. I think the number of heroin addicts is like 1 out of 250 or something. You can't find, heroin, Daniel, is a drug that does not have, out of 100 people you won't find a heroin addict. You need more than 100 people to find one, right? So, okay, so therefore percentage is kind of hard because you'd have to do like a 0.01, you know what I mean? Because it's not out of 100. So for things that are a little more obscure, meaning there isn't 1 out of 100, we use what's called a rate. I'll give you an example of when you'd really want to use a rate. I was watching this show the other day, not the other day, it was a couple of years ago, about this girl who had this very rare disease called sleeping syndrome or something. Did you hear about this? Do you remember this? Where she was like sleeping for like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and then she'd get up, and then she was fine, and then she'd be hit with this thing where she'd have to sleep for another 3 weeks, and she'd just get up and go to the bathroom. And it was so rare that it was like 1 out of, like, I don't know, 2 million people have it. You know what I mean? So if you tell me that 0.0000 whatever have it, that's not going to be meaningful to me at a certain point. But if you tell me 1 out of 2 million people have it, it makes more sense to me, right? So yeah. So like in this case, rates are better. So I could use a rate. So if there were only 4 drug addicts per 1,000 people, I could use the unit 1,000. So rate is the total number of responses per unit of the population. So it could be anything. 1 out of 1 million, 1 out of 10 million. It could be whatever you want, but it's for stuff where there isn't 100, there isn't 1 out of 100 people who are doing it. So some things are less common.
Yeah.
So in that case, we use a rate, and a rate is, you know, it's this. A percentage is actually a rate, right? The rate is just out of 100, right? 46 out of 100 people. So a rate is just a more general term that means percentage. I mean, a percent is a more specific rate, like a mortgage rate. So the only difference between a rate and a percentage is the unit, right? The unit for a percentage is always going to be 100, but the rate, for a rate, it could be 100 or it could be per unit of something, of the population. Percentages and rates are great because they can do a couple things. They can tell us how pervasive a problem is, okay? So I can say whether or not it's more common in women or men because I can compare out of 100 women and 100 men, right? Or different ethnic groups. kind of like what I was talking about before, because I can compare. Is it more problematic in Native Americans? Is it more problematic in Hispanic Americans? I can now compare because I can look at out of 100 Native Americans, how many are using drugs? Out of 100 Hispanic Americans, and I can compare. It also takes into account a rate or percentage. Will take into account shifts in the population over time, right? So today we have a much larger population than we did in 1900, right? But if I know how many people use drugs out of 100 in 1900 and how many people use drugs out of 100 in the year 2011, I can see, was it more common among the 1900s, or was it more common here today, right? Because I can compare even though there are differences in the population. And like I said, it allows us to make comparisons across different social groups. Okay, do I want to talk about descriptive statistics? I guess so, quickly. Descriptive statistics are just that, nothing more complicated than statistics that are used to describe. Okay, and in our class, we're mainly going to look at descriptive statistics, which is just like frequencies, percentages, the prevalence, incident rates, percentages. These are descriptive statistics, like how many men compared to how many women use drugs. Those are describing, right? There are other statistics that are called inferential statistics, which are a little more complicated, and that's just looking at like what causes, hold on a second. Hi, sweetie. Yes. Okay. Now you want to say hi to the class? Okay. He's going to say hi for a minute. Hello. Okay. Bye-bye, honey. He just woke up from his nap. Okay, so inferential statistics are looking for an association, okay? So an association is like a relationship, meaning a relationship just beyond the relationship of gender and drug use. It's more like trying to attempt to find a cause and effect relationship. So for example, you know, we know that in heat, when it gets really hot, people are more aggressive, right? There's a number of reasons. One reason is because heat actually irritates people. If you want to make people angry, you can, they amp up the heat. They've done experiments where they've made it hotter and put people become more aggressive. Another thing is like, so heat can cause, so that's kind of more inferential, like what's causing something, an association that's causing something. But we're not going to really get into that. If you were studying, if we were going to do research on whether or not those theories were true, you know, those theories that we were talking about, the etiology, we would use inferential statistics because we're trying to find out what causes drug use. Beyond just like descriptions like gender and, you know what I'm saying? Descriptive stuff. Okay. I guess you could talk about it like that. Yeah, it would be like you're trying to figure out what the missing thing is in an inferential statistic, logically, whereas the other one is just kind of like very basic connection. So we're going to look more at descriptive statistics. Thank you. Well, actually, not all. I should say that because some of these things are kind of more well, they're pretty much more descriptive. Okay, but I'll point it out when we get there so as not to confuse. Okay, so we already talked about official statistics, so let's go through. These are the ones we're going to look at. Uniform crime reports, ATOM, correctional data, DAWN, and treatment data. I'm just going to turn, Derek, your mic off for a second because I can hear something like TV, but it's okay, don't worry. If you want, I'll just put it back on. Okay, uniform crime reports, ATOM. Okay, these are the things that we're going to look at. These are examples of official. So we're going to go through these. and get started. Okay. Now remember, official statistics are gathered through the day-to-day organizations, right, of these government agencies. So uniform crime reports is one of the first official statistics that I can use to get information about drugs. I think I gave you guys a table too, didn't I, with information about these things? These different, all the different ones? Maybe not. So basically, the uniform crime reports are reported by local police departments and compiled by the FBI. All it is when somebody gets nabbed for something or arrested for something, right? That information goes to the police department. And then people can go to the police department and find out, well, what's the occurrence of this kind of thing, right? Like they have property crimes, they have violent crimes, right? More serious crimes. So they have all this information. And so I can go to the police station and look, but one of the problems is, is that if it doesn't have information on, I can find out how many property crimes are committed, right? But official statistics does not record whether or not someone was intoxicated at the time. So the best information about drugs that I'm going to get from official statistics, from uniform crime reports, sorry, I keep saying that, is on these these things, 1, 2, 3, 4, these 4 things. Because the uniform crime reports are going to give me police department information on drug abuse violations. So a drug abuse violation would be sale or possession. You could put that down there. That'll help you, right? So if you go to the police, if you get arrested for sale and possession of drugs, it's going to go into drug abuse violations. They're going to record that. They also record DUI offenses. They record liquor license violations. So, for example, selling to a minor without a license. Selling to a minor, selling without a license, or outside of the scope of your license. So if I'm only allowed to sell beer and wine, I'm not licensed to sell hard liquor, I can get a violation for that. Selling to minors, those are liquor law violations. And then there's public drunkenness, which is this other one. So these are the only offenses that are directly related to drugs, which are pretty narrow, aren't they? So that's all they got. So even though, let's go back and look at the different types of offenses, there are all these different kinds of offenses that are collected by the Uniform Crime Reports, Part 1 offenses. So these are like the most serious offenses. So like crimes that are used, like violent, like homicide, rape, robbery, burglary, grand larceny, motor vehicle theft, arson, those are considered Part 1. They're considered more serious. Part 2 are less serious considered, and there's a whole bunch like embezzlement, stolen property, sex offense, drug abuse, which we talked about, and the other ones. But the problem is that I don't have, from the Uniform Crime Reports, if I get information on homicide, it's not going to tell me if this guy was on drugs when he did it. So the Uniform Crime Reports provides me with a very narrow, right? Because remember, they're not collecting the data for research. What are they collecting the data for? Themselves. And that's just not something they collect. So the problem is that the Uniform Crime Reports is limited. We are limited to these violations, the ones that are directly associated with drugs or substances. That's all we can get from the Uniform Crime Reports. Now, let me ask you this. Do you guys follow what I'm saying? How it's limited? Okay. Okay, so what did I want to say about that? Well, let's just quickly look at this chart. According to this chart, what I see is that alcohol is responsible for a lot of problems, more so than drug abuse. Drug abuse is like 1 million, right? And alcohol is like 1.7. So if you compare the two, we see that drug abuse violations, sale and possession, is a lot more minor than DUI, liquor law, drunkenness, and alcohol, which is kind of interesting. But again, it's alcohol is a legal drug, so remember availability affects stuff. But here's another issue that I have a problem with. You don't see the chart on my you guys can't see the chart up here? Okay, here's what I want to tell you about this chart and why it's not great. The reason why this chart, okay, Teresa, you're maybe sometimes if you have, this is what I'm learning from doing this for a couple of years, is that if you have like Netflix on, or if, and it may not be the case for you, I don't know, but we're going to get to Daniel's point in a second. If you have Netflix on, if you have any other person downloading big files or anything like that, it can screw up the bandwidth at your house. So I would either recommend like checking to see if anybody's doing that, because my son, I can't let him watch Netflix or it screws everything up, or just log in and come back in, or get a hard copy. Or close out. Oh, the other thing is, if you have, before I come online, I close out like my mail, my Google account, I close out my work account, I close out Facebook. Does everybody realize that? Those things will screw up too. So close out all your files. And close everything before you relog in. Okay, so here's the problem. Let me tell you another problem with the uniform crime reports. A problem with the uniform crime reports is that these data only reflect arrests. So why is that a problem? Does it? Oh, right. So arrest can't tell me about frequency, right? It can just tell me like who got caught, right? So that's one issue. And another issue is it doesn't tell me how frequent it is, because what if they were on the hunt, right, for DUIs that week? Let me give you an example. When I first moved to Sherman Oaks, I love this example. I admit it, I'm not the best driver. When I first moved to Sherman Oaks, I remember driving to the gym and getting pulled over, okay, for a move that I did in Pasadena a million times. And the guy was like, you can't do that. That's, I think it was like making a right turn while people were still in the crosswalk, but they were walking away. And he was like, you can't do that. I was like, oh, I didn't know that, and I just got slammed with a ticket. Then I got another driving violation and another one. And I was just like, my God, I'm such a bad driver. Like, I got like 3 in 2 weeks by the same police officer who was very obnoxious. And I realized, I was like, I know it was horrible. It cost me a lot of money, too. And I think he let me off on the third one and said, you know, because I told him, I'm like, I'm in the middle of driving school, so please, because I had to take driving school. And so I thought to myself, am I a worse driver than I was when I lived in Pasadena? No. It's just that are there more people driving poorly in Sherman Oaks than Pasadena? No. They have different priorities. No. They have different priorities, right? That guy was told to go look for people who were doing this, because they were kind of like lame-o. I mean, you shouldn't do it because you'll get a ticket around here, but they were kind of things that were, you know, lame. They weren't like huge things. I mean, okay, you shouldn't drive like that, but you understand what I'm saying, right? So I think there's equally as many people getting away with that as in Pasadena, but it wasn't a priority in Pasadena. So it doesn't mean more people are doing it, right? It's just a law enforcement priority here, so they're going to get a lot more people showing up for, you know, bad driving offenses. You know, traffic violations are higher in Sherman Oaks. Does that mean arrests for traffic violations? Let's pretend I wasn't arrested. Tickets for traffic violations are a lot higher, right, than in Pasadena. Does that mean that more people are committing traffic violations and they're more frequent in Sherman Oaks? No, it does not. Right, so that's called a law enforcement priority. So the uniform crime reports is considered poor because it basically is looking at law enforcement priorities it can't account for law enforcement priorities. So let me show you the slide that has that. So it can reflect, okay, it can reflect those changes that you see in the chart. I think Daniel is pointing out, like over time, could just reflect a change in law enforcement priority.
Focusing on.
Not, right? Not really a solid difference in frequency. And the data, only if, which we talked about a minute ago, only if reflects people who are arrested. So that's going to underestimate, you know, drug use, because there's tons of DUIs floating around that aren't getting arrested, right? So these are the limitations of the UCR. Another thing that's a limitation, so of this data set, is that people can be counted more than once. So if you have a repeated drug addict, well, let's say town drunk, okay, who constantly is driving around interview you and ask you, when you committed that homicide, were you on drugs? And tell me all the drugs you did. So they'll write it down. And then what they'll do is they'll ask them for a urine sample. And why would they get a urine sample on this person? Right. So what are they doing when they get an interview and a urine sample? What was that term? Triangulation. Right. So this is an official statistic because this information is still gathered in the daily procedures of the operations of the police department, but it has an added component where there's actually a person who goes out to the site and randomly, it's random selection, and interviews specific people. And within 48 hours, and they're told that it's confidential, there's no legal consequences, and participation is voluntary. And what's interesting is most people actually want to participate in it. Isn't that kind of interesting? Because I would think they wouldn't. But so it's measures of recently arrested people, random voluntary participation, and in the urine. They interview them. They'll ask them questions about education, living arrangement, income, drug use patterns in the past and current, and then they'll ask them, like, if they'll take the urine sample, they'll look for amphetamines, barbiturates, benzos, cocaine, all the different drugs, and let's look and see what they find. Well, what do you think? Well, I'll put this here. I'm going to put a pod and I'm going to run to the bathroom for 1 second because I drank all this water before I started because it was so hot. You tell me. I want to know. Do you think, I'm going to give you this pod. Okay, hold on, people. Okay, I'm going to open this and let you vote while I go. Tell me what you think. That's so interesting. So more people actually thought that it was violent crime. So let's see what the study showed. Okay. This is just, let's skip this for a second. What am I doing? Okay, here we go. The majority of people, according to this chart, when they've been in Adam, are arrested who are on drugs. It's actually property crime. Why do you think that is? Violent offenses are associated with alcohol and drugs, but why do you think it's property crime? Am I frozen? Okay, thank you. You know, I think a lot of us think that, and it's a good way to reason, and um, but what's interesting is that it's actually more about property because
No.
they're usually trying to get money for drugs.
Well, I thought that it would be violent offenses.
See what I mean? So that's part of the problem.
I was thinking that the
Well, like
drugs
they're
would
on.
alter their their brain, so they would probably just get more violent, or I don't. That's just how I associate
Yeah,
it.
they do. But they would take the drug and then they're like, okay, now I need to go steal some stuff because I need more drug money. You know, and it's just more common. That doesn't mean that it's not happening in violent. It's happening in almost the majority, but it's more common in property, which tells us, I mean, it's very common in sales, possession, and prostitution for females. But the point is that it's more common for property because a lot of people steal. There are drugs that make people more aggressive, which we'll talk about. Oh, we're not going to do crime because unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have enough days because we lost a few days. Okay. So we're not going to get to do that, I don't think. Okay. So here's some stuff that we find. Well, let me just tell you then, since I brought it up. Heroin does not make people a criminal. Cocaine is associated with a lot of violence because cocaine jacks people up and they're more
Alcohol.
Okay, are you guys here? Okay, because we have 1 minute. So, Daniel, do you want to go online? I mean, on camera? Denisha, are you there? Would you like to be on camera? It's always good for your participation grade. I thought so. I thought so. Okay, hold on. What about Corey Phillips? There you are. What about Corey Phillips? Are you there, Corey Phillips? Corey Phillips. I'm looking for my notes. Not that I don't really need them, but it's annoying. Missing my Dawn. Oh no. There it is. Is that all? No, there's a missing page. Ted's. Oh, Dawn's just flipped. All right, I see 9 people who are here. So, Denisha, is that your home office? No, it's your workplace, right? Where are you? Oh, you're in like a repair place? Interesting. I was like, no, but I knew it wasn't your house, right? Because it looks kind of like an office. Okay, Corey, I don't even know what you look like, so I need to put you on camera. Where are you? So I'm enabling your audio and I'm enabling your video because I want to see you. Corey. Corey? I'm waiting for Corey. Okay, let me just quickly give you some stuff on correctional statistics. Actually, it's going to get dark in here. I want to turn a light on. Hold on. Okay. So, okay, here's the stuff on correctional statistics, because that's another thing where we can get information about drug use. Correctional statistics are just statistics that are based on state, federal, and local prisoners. And again, this is very voluntary, and it's collected by the Census Bureau, and they do it about 2 times a year, and they get race, ethnicity, and all that. I don't go into great detail about it, but what we do know is it'll just tell us, like, basically characteristics of users and mainly just social comparison, race, ethnicity, sex of the offense and offender, and the type of offense and the types of drugs that they use. But we do have that. This one I'm going to go into more detail about. This is called the Drug Abuse Warning Network, and this is collected. It combines 2 things. It includes hospital data and morgue data, which we call medical examiner data. So it's like ER, ME. Drug Abuse Warning Network, I always say D. D stands for danger, that's how I remember it, as being different from ADAM, which is A stands for arrest. And the Drug Abuse Warning Network basically, in general, is reporting information on the health consequences of drug use and abuse. So it taps into people who might not be involved in the criminal justice system, and it really tells us about the dangers of drug use. So for example, who is showing up at the ER complaining of heart palpitations? What drugs are they on? Sometimes they'll see a frequency of people having heart palpitations, and they'll say, "Oh, wait, maybe the methamphetamine use is up," or an increased. I mean, you can't say it's a definite increase in use, but you can say, "Wow, a lot of people have been showing up, so maybe it's this drug is getting more dangerous. Maybe the LSD is becoming more strong or different, and people are showing up in the hospital more often." So it's basically when people show up in the hospital, it just they record like why they're there and what drugs they're on, if it's drug related. So that's what Dawn shows us. So they'll also tell us, Dawn tells us if it's illicit or prescription or over-the-counter. They'll tell us if it was non-pharmaceutical, if it's alcohol in combination with other drugs, but they won't do alcohol if it's just alcohol alone. And they do alcohol alone only if it's under 21 because of the risks. So only a fraction of drug users show up in the hospital. So it's not really representative of the general population. So for example, who's more likely to show up in the hospital? What kind of drug user? Someone with health insurance. Yeah, because they have health insurance. So a lot of factors influence whether or not somebody's going to go to a hospital. Health insurance, how close you live to a hospital actually impacts whether or not you're going to show up, and education. So it's not, it's not going to show us a very fair representation. But it does show us some information about the dangers of drug use because people are coming to the hospital for reasons. What's interesting is more legal drugs than illegal drugs come in through to the hospital. Psychotherapeutic drugs are the #1. Alcohol in combination is the #2 for people to show up in Dawn. So again, it's ER and it's also ME. So if I keep going to the ER, it doesn't look at by individual, it only looks by count. So I could come in 3 times a week for a problem with cocaine and my heart's palpitating. It's not going to count. It's just going to show me. It's not going to show me that the same person came in. Well, you're not going to get arrested in the hospital. You don't get arrested for using drugs. But so the other thing is drug-related deaths. So remember when Michael Jackson died, Anna Nicole Smith died, Corey Haim died. those people showed up in the morgue, right? That's where they go. So that's the second place that Dawn covers. So one is the ER and one is the morgue. So for the ER, I have alcohol. This is just like episodes that it's showing us that cocaine is one of the #1 things that shows up at Dawn. Okay, so for emergency room episodes, the most frequent one was cocaine. Heroin was #2. Marijuana. And marijuana is usually in combination with something else. And methamphetamine. Again, it doesn't tell us how frequent these drugs are, but it gives us an idea or an indication of the danger. Deaths caused directly or indirectly by one or more drugs. Another thing I want to tell you is, if I show up at the morgue, this will show me like what drug-related deaths. Okay, so drug-related deaths are tabulated by suicide, homicide, adverse reactions to medications, over-the-counter medications, accidental, could not be determined. So that's how they look at it. And psychotherapeutic drugs like antidepressants, antipsychotics, sedatives, and hypnotics, those are all drugs and CNS stimulants that are considered adverse reactions to medication. So let me look at this chart and tell you what drugs. So narcotics, that makes sense. You know what narcotics are? Painkillers, right? Like heroin, any opiate family. The next one that shows up is cocaine in the system. And again, if I have a bunch of drugs in my system, they're all counted. So most people, marijuana doesn't kill, but people who use a lot of drugs tend to have marijuana in their system. That guy also is going to show up who was on Celebrity Rehab. Jeff Conaway died. You guys know him? Well, he died. He was in Greece. So I think the key thing to remember, this is just about Dawn, is that it shows us information on the health consequences of drug use. And, okay, this is the emergency room visits. Here's what I have. So this shows us like the number of emergency room visits. And again, this is numbers. And what drug's coming up the most? Psychotherapeutics. So that would be like a psychotherapeutic is an antidepressant, an antipsychotic, a sedative, hypnotics, CNS stimulant. So for example, I think you would consider Ritalin there, even though, because they're not, because it's considered like if you're using Ritalin. So look at all that. So what's interesting is that there's so much more psychotherapeutics coming up than heroin in the emergency room. Isn't that interesting? Psychotherapeutics coming from the pharmacies. We don't tend to think of them as dangerous because they're not really framed that way, right? Well, marijuana, where's marijuana? Marijuana will not kill you. I'll tell you what the deal is with marijuana and why it shows up there. We're not looking at death anyway. We're looking at emergency room visits. But I'll tell you why it shows up there. It's not a dangerous drug. I believe it shows up there because it's usually people who do drugs tend to always do marijuana. It's very common, so it's always in their system. A lot of the times they'll have it in their system. Does that make sense? You can't get arrested for using drugs. You have to be arrested for sale and possession. Okay, so I think what's interesting to note is this common psychotherapeutics. You thought, what was the reason they were coming in? Daniel. Right, they're coming in, right, but they're coming in like, okay, I'm having a cocaine panic attack. So then they'll pull blood and they'll measure and they'll see, yeah, dude's got cocaine, dude's got marijuana in his system. So it'll show up. And it shows up also in the death, so in the morgue data. Morgue data, you're only going to show up once, right? So here's some of the good stuff about Dawn. It gives us an idea of the dangers of drug use. It's tracked every year so we can look at patterns across time, but it's not a reliable estimate of the drug use prevalence. It's only like dangers. So for example, maybe all of a sudden all these people show up in Dawn ME, the morgue data, on heroin. Does that mean that more people are using heroin? More people die of heroin. Does that mean more people are using it? All of a sudden I see the incidence of death to heroin as increasing. Does that mean more people are dying? No. You know why? Maybe it's just a bad batch, right? Maybe there's a much stronger batch. You've ever heard of that? More people are going. It maybe like the heroin is really strong and a lot of people are using it and they don't realize it. So the potency might be different. Exactly. So, and it only shows who went to the ER, not who. Not people who stayed home and dealt with their misery. And the other interesting thing that I want to point out about Dawn that's not great is that it doesn't measure chronic effects of drug use. Do you know what I mean by chronic effects? So when they go to the ME data, it doesn't show, they don't look and see, oh my God, this person has really bad cirrhosis of the liver. You know what I mean? They ended up here, they're not looking at like long-term chronic effects of drugs, like, oh, this person's lungs are totally shot. They must have been a smoker, or they were smoking marijuana. Look, it doesn't look at that. It's only like suspicion of like some sort of drug overdose or death. Okay, let's quickly do TEDS, because TEDS I don't, it's not such a major thing, but it is interesting. So TEDS is treatment episodes data. So this is like, because there's federal money for substance abuse prevention treatment, TEDS data basically collects information on who went to treatment programs under substance abuse grants, so we can get some kind of idea of like who's getting treated for whatever drug more. Okay, so like Lindsay Lohan would not be included in this because these are treatment programs that are kind of like funded by government, and I think when she goes to rehab, she goes to some like special, doesn't she go to some special rehab that's all private? So really wealthy people aren't going to show up in here, right? It's more for people who are getting public. So again, then it's skewed that way too. So it could include court-ordered treatment, right? And let's see. Okay. Like, for example, you know Prop 36? We have Prop 36. You know Prop 36 is? Okay, what is Prop 36, Derek? You need to, oh, I have to turn your mic on, sorry, because I had it off. Okay, go ahead, Derek. What's Prop 36? Exactly. Thank you. So, and you can't, it's only if you're like non-violent offender and you're not repeated, generally. So they'll let you go to treatment instead of jail. And it was passed in 2000, and 61% of California voted for it. You can have 1 or 2 nonviolent drug possessions in lieu of prison, and apparently it saves a lot of money for us. Less prison, less reoffending, less foster care, more kids go back to their parents. So that would be something that would be collected under here too. And you know what? We're going to talk about Prop 36 because we're going to do treatment, one of my favorite ones. So we'll talk more about it. So let's just look here. So one of the things that I want to show you is this is an old chart. I should really look up new ones because I use this as an example to make a point. Alcohol is the #1 thing that people were treated for, followed by the #1, like, illegal substance is cocaine. Can I say that more people are having an issue with alcohol? More people have a problem with alcohol based on this chart. Can I say that? No, I can't. You know why? Remember I was telling you about the driving and how when I was driving, it's possible that they have law enforcement priorities here in Sherman Oaks where they're more likely to get people for making a left, right? This could be a judge's. Some judges are way more like wanting to, they'll have a priority like, let's send all the coke people to treatment, but I'm not sending the heroin people. So this too reflects judges' priorities in terms of who they want to send. So that's one of the flaws. You can't use this as a way of determining prevalence at all. Another thing that's a problem with this, as with any court-ordered treatment, is that when you're court-ordered treatment, your motivation is pretty low. It could be, right? There's different types of people who are, if you're court-ordered, not all these people, but if you are court-ordered to be treated, I think actually all these people are court-ordered, to be honest with you. I do. So if you are court-ordered to treat, isn't that different than if you're not? Do you remember, Derek, did you read in the book whether or not, because I can't believe it, but I forgot. Is it court-ordered, Ted? Do you know? Do you remember reading anything? Okay. I need to check that, but let me write this down. I have here a note that it's court-ordered, but I don't know. Okay. But the point is, if it were court-ordered, what would be a problem? My motivation might be different, right? Somebody who's court-ordered is maybe, and the most important thing for quitting drugs and doing well in treatment is motivation. The 2 factors that increase your chances of doing well are motivation and length of stay. But we'll talk more about that. So what did I want to say? So it's not representative of all people seeking treatment. Oh, people maybe, so it's not 100%. Data is based on treatment admissions, not representative of all people seeking treatment, and people more likely to be court-ordered and low income. So, and the same person can be counted twice. Okay, now we're going to go on to official. You guys ready? So official are the ones that researchers are doing, right? So let's look at some official statistics. So these are gathered for the purpose. I have a research question, I have a hypothesis, and I'm going to try to figure out. So these are the 3 we're going to talk about. Monitoring the Future, National Household Survey, and Pulse Check. Both Monitoring the Future and National Household Survey are most identical to each other. I'd write that down. They both look at their survey, so it's a paper and pencil questionnaire, and they ask you about how often you use drugs. Do you use them daily? Do you use them weekly? Do you use them monthly? And they also ask about your attitudes towards drugs, and they get information on your gender and ethnicity and income and all sorts of demographic characteristics. So these are quantitative surveys. This last one, Pulse Check, is a qualitative survey. Not survey, qualitative interview. The Pulse Check is the least systematic. These two are very systematic. These are the most systematic things that we have. Okay, Monitoring the Future is a survey that's given out to high school students and college students, mainly high school, but there's a small college sample, and it's conducted by researchers, PhDs, at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. This has been going on since the 70s. It was started in 1975, and it started as just a senior survey, and then they expanded it to 8th, 10th, and 12th, and it's about 50,000 students in 420 public and private schools. It's a representative sample of the United States. What does a representative sample of the United States mean? Everybody, yeah, go ahead, go ahead. Exactly. It's a mirror image. It's a smaller little petri dish of the, it's a microcosm of the larger population. So it mirrors the representation in the rest of the United States. But it's, right? So that's what I mean by representative. So we can generalize this information to the rest of the United States. Even though our sample is only 50,000 people, we can use them as a we can base these people's behavior and extrapolate to the rest of the United States. So these are called representative samples. So this is what we use for frequencies, this one, and monitoring the future, and national household. So, okay, I put the chart in, but I didn't, it's in the book. What's interesting about monitoring the future is the most popular drug used among teenagers every year is
a representative
alcohol.
sample is basically a random
By far,
sample
alcohol is the most popular drug.
the whole population.
And if you look in the book, I think it gives you a nice percentage. I think it's like 40-something, and it increases, right? 8th graders use less, 10th graders use a little more, and 12th graders use the most. So each year, it increases. That makes sense. As people get older, teens get older, they use more. What's interesting is, yes, it has race and gender and everything. Marijuana is by far the most most used illicit drug. But it shows you that other drugs like crack, cocaine, heroin, meth, those are very marginally used. Not many people are using them. If somebody wants to open up the new book and tell me what the percentages are. In an old book, I had Rufinol is 0.7%, cocaine, I think crack cocaine was like 5.5%, heroin was 0.9%, meth was 2.2%. All these drugs were really used small. The most used one is alcohol. You should look in your book at some of I don't know if I have the number here. This is a 30-day prevalence, so past month, if you've used 70% over time. It's lowered here in the 90s. But you can see that alcohol is by far always the most used. I have more recent charts on this kind of stuff in the next section. This is any illicit drug, which alcohol would be considered that. But you can look, so this is kind of a breakdown. Okay, here's what's great about this. Monitoring the future is excellent because we use random samples. Oh, Derek has a question. Go ahead, Derek. Do you have your mic on? Yeah, go ahead, Derek. Probably You know, I wish I had the rest of this, but it went down because there were more laws. So remember when Reagan came in and he was really into, um, Reagan implemented the Uniform Drinking Act, which raised the drinking age to 21, I think. And then they had a lot of the laws for like drunk driving and DUIs. I think that's why alcohol had gone down. Um, More awareness of alcohol during this time period. Does that answer your question? Were you thinking something else? Yeah, they're all, I think they're all going down. Like, I think they all, see how they're all kind of mirroring each other, too? And a lot of people ask me this question, like, how do we know? And I mean, it's very hard to answer because there's so many things going on in the world at this time. Like, maybe it had to do with the economy. Maybe it had to do with, I mean, it's so hard when you're doing research on this kind of stuff. It's very hard to know. Maybe it was the more strict policies. I I don't know. Does he have? Because you have the newest edition of the book, right? What does the cover look like? Because I don't have it yet. I have to order it. I have to ask them to send me one. Okay. Do they have a chart that goes past this one? Like, if you look, is there a monitoring the future that shows us to a more recent time period? No, he is the older one. Donisha, you have it. Yeah, Donisha has the right one. I'm wondering if she can find a picture that shows us something like monitoring the future, but it'll probably go on and show us. Okay, well, she's looking for that. Let's talk about what's good about it. Um, okay, one of the things that's good about monitoring the future is that it's repeatedly asking the same questions over time. So when you ask the same questions over time, what does that mean? That means you can track trends. So I would put that down. You can track trends in drug use. It's got a huge sample that's representative, so we can extrapolate, or the other word is generalize, to the rest of the population. So we're able to generalize. When you have a representative sample. Um, and you can look at region, you can look at all these different areas. Um, but here's what is one of the problems about this survey? It happens in a school. Why would it be? What would be bad about having this happen in a school setting? Well, here I have people might lie. That's one thing, but that goes kind of in contrary to what I was saying before about people lie equally. But what do you think is a problem in terms of representativeness of the sample? Because in order for a sample to be representative, it has to be a microcosm mirroring the rest of society. Who is missing from this sample? That's okay. You know what? I'm gonna get a copy of that book. I have to order it from them. Not order, have them send me one. But thank you for looking. Appreciate it. What's the problem with representation at a school? Who is anyone likely to be missing from school? Not everybody, because dropouts. If you're a dropout, you are not necessarily going to be in school. Now, who are the biggest drug users? Probably a dropout, not 100%, but more likely, right? People with big drug problems, hardcore drug addicts are going to be more likely to drop out. So they'll be missing. So people think that this is got, and it all, like, got people who are absent from school or have problems with truancy, or people who have dropped out are not included. So that's a problem, right? With the generalizability of the sample. So that's why we love the National Household Survey. So that's the key issue there, is the dropout issue, right? And people who are not there on the day. That's the one thing that I'd say is the biggest flaw. Okay. The next one we're going to talk about is the National Household Survey. This one is sponsored by, and like I said, you can get it online, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, and they conduct interviews with individuals in 70,000 households. So they actually go to your house with a laptop, and they will interview you face-to-face from 12 years old to 70 or 80 or whatever, up, all the way up, 100. And they ask people the same types of questions, and it's representative of the U.S. population, meaning it mirrors, it's a smaller number of people, but they represent or mirror the demographics of the larger population. Why can't we assume people that drop out use drugs? Well, they just don't do it because they only do it in the school. And one of the hard problems is when people drop out. I did a research with on HIV positive drug addict kids, and they're very difficult to track, like homeless kids. You know, I'm not saying dropout, but a lot of them, sometimes they're homeless, so they're hard to get. One of the reasons why the Monitoring the Future survey is kind of good is because it's cheap to just go to the school, because it's easy, there's a bunch of kids, they're accessible. It becomes way more expensive when you're going to people's houses. And then something like the National Household Survey is going to miss homeless people, right, because they're not at a fixed address. But I think they're trying to get people who are not at fixed addresses now. So they just don't do it. They just don't add them to the sample. I think in the National Household Survey now, they're doing it, though. They are going and getting people who aren't at fixed addresses. So the same thing, it looks at rates of use, number of users. It looks at illicit and licit drugs, so legal and not legal, attitudes, problems associated with drugs, and all of that. But the great thing about this one, so it's the same types of questions as Monitoring the Future. The only difference is that this one has a what? Wider age span. And it's not reliant on the school, so the population is going to be more representative. So we find that alcohol is used by the highest percent of the population. Then we see tobacco, legal. Oh, you found the chart? Can you put it up on the camera? I don't know if I'll be able to see it. Oh, see that one? I'm looking for that they don't have one with like a line through it. Don't worry, I'll look for it. Okay, so then tobacco is next. Heroin, crack, PCP are used very little. So let's see, do I have it? Here. So let's look. This comes from the National Household Survey, and it's the percent of ethnic groups using drugs in the last 30 days. Let's see what it says. Okay, so here's how the chart works. Hispanic is the darkest, and it starts over here. Black is this one here, then white over here, and then Native American, which is the lightest, is here on the side, okay? Looking at this chart, this is alcohol use in general. You can see that whites are the biggest alcohol users. Now, this doesn't include problematic drinking. This is just regular drinking. So there's no judgment on this, like how often, like probably past 30-day drinking, okay? So it could be social. What's interesting is but we know that whites are the biggest drinkers. What's interesting is if you look across by ethnicity, which ethnic group, Native Americans, are the highest on everything, right? Highest on tobacco, highest on heavy alcohol or problematic drinking, highest on marijuana, highest on cocaine. I believe they're highest on hallucinogenics, highest on non-medical prescription use, and highest on any illicit drugs. Native Americans, by far, have the biggest drug problem in this country. This is interesting, isn't it? A lot of people say it has to do with poverty, reservation life, you know, all sorts of, because I think a lot of the people on reservations aren't working, right? Is that true? Reservations. What is the number one thing associated with drug use is free time. Okay, let's look at who's the next person for tobacco? Tobacco would be whites, right? Biggest tobacco users, followed by African American, and then Hispanic is lowest. Heavy alcohol, Native American, white, then Hispanic, African American, lowest. Marijuana, Native American, next African American, white, Hispanic. Cocaine is a little hard to see. After this group, I believe it's Hispanic, then white, and African American are the lowest. Hallucinogenics are pretty low altogether, but Native American number 1. I think it's white American number 2, and then Hispanic and African American last. Prescriptions, Native American, white, Hispanic, African American. Any illicit drug, Native American, I think African American and white are pretty much together, and then Hispanic is lowest. Is that kind of what you expected? Are you shocked by this, or how did this live up to or not live up to what you thought it would be? Okay, tell me how you're surprised, because that's interesting for me. I find that interesting. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so the media representation is very different from what the reality is. This chart is, and now I forgot what that chart was, because I don't have, for some reason my notes are all funky. Hold on one second. This. I don't remember what this chart is, so I'm going to have to, I think this was like illicit drug use, but I'm not sure. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to say because I'm not 100% sure what that one is. All All right, okay, what do you guys think? Who uses drugs more, men or women? Let me do a pod. All right, who uses drugs more, men or women? Let's go with the stuff we just saw on that chart. Alcohol, tobacco, everything. Showed up here. I have 10 votes. 10 votes. Make sure to vote. Okay, I'm going to close it. Men. Men by far are more likely to use drugs than women in every possible, hold on a second, in every possible way, except for, I think, heroin, they're similar. So let's look. Men are more likely to drink. So men is the bar here, women is the bar here. Men are more likely to drink. So 53% socially of all men drink alcohol, 40.2% of all women. Tobacco, men win out. Heavy alcohol, men. So men do drugs more than women, and when they do them heavier. Marijuana, cocaine, men slightly. Hallucinogenics, men slightly more. Very close for non-medical prescription use. Heroin, head-to-head, but men by and far more so than women. Women, when they do use drugs, tend to be more into thinking it's for a medical purpose, like, oh, you know, I have anxiety. They're more likely to get drugs like that from the doctor. Yeah, heroin is the same. Now let's look at ages. Well, what age do you think, let me do a pod. What age do you think okay, I'm going to give you a bunch of ages, and then you tell me what age you think. Let me just get the breakdowns. Where's that one? Okay. Okay, tell me which age you think uses the most drugs. I have 11 votes. Okay, I'm going to... Okay, you got it. 18 to 25. Good for you. Why did you guys pick 18 to 25? It's true. There's a reason for it. Well, let's think about what's going on. 18 to 25, you have more freedom, less likely to have kids, more people away from home, less parental control, more money in your pocket. less responsibility. So that's when you're more likely to use drugs. People often think that it's teenagers because in the news we see a lot of teenagers and stuff, but it's actually 18 to 25 that has the most. So that's the biggest group. So if you look at the chart, this is 60 plus. Things slow down. I always thought that I was thinking older people would drink more because they have more free time. But for alcohol, just social drinking, the most common is, the biggest one is 18 to 25. No, actually, drinking is the only one that's different. Drinking is 40 to, no, 26 to 39. And they say that that's because they have more stress, maybe, but it's social drinking, maybe more money to go out. Heavy drinking is most likely in 18 to 25. Then it kind of peters down by these brackets, lowest in the older age group. It pretty much all follows the same pattern, doesn't it? Is there any difference? This is the only one that's not exactly the same. So people kind of peak at 18 to 25. This is education. What do you think uses the most drugs? Let's just look at this one. What's interesting is that for education, it's pretty much the middle. So medium to middle use the most drugs, which I think is kind of strange, isn't it? So it's medium to most common in the medium, and then higher. You know, I need to look at this, actually, because I'm wondering if it was, I'm pretty sure it's education. Right, and that's the question, like, how is it defined? And I'm thinking, like, this might be high school, college, graduate school? I don't know. That's a good question. I have to look that up, because let me see if I have that. I have to find it. Okay, let me just check. Here we go. Oh no, you know what that is? That's parents' education. So that's 12th graders drug use by parents' education. So I don't know if, let me see if it tells me here. Okay, let's see. Similar findings on drug use and social, again, educational attainment indicates that those with a relatively high educational level report the highest use of illegal drugs, followed by those with little education. This is just in general. For example, adults reporting some college at their highest level of educational attainment also report the highest past year marijuana, followed by those with less high school and high school graduates, with college graduates being least likely to report use in the past year. So some college is associated with highest. Some college. Okay, you know, let's look at this one. Oh wait, where's the urban and rural? I don't have an urban and rural here. Maybe it's in the next chapter. I think it's in the next chapter. Okay. Um, so here's the stuff on National Household Survey. It's good because it includes a broader sample than monitoring the future, and you can track over time. But they feel that it underreports heroin and cocaine use because they feel that people who use heroin and cocaine a lot are probably not at a fixed address. Although I think that they have improved it by trying to get people who have more fixed addresses by going after like homeless people and stuff and going to shelters and everything like that. But this is actually the best resource that we have. The next one that we're going to talk about is what's called Pulse. Pulse is basically a survey that looks at drug specialists. Do you know what a drug specialist is? Like an expert. And it's trying to get a pulse. What is a pulse? Pulse is a feel for something. So you're trying to get a feel for what are emerging trends. So if I want to know what an emerging trend might be in drugs, right? What's going on out there, I might actually want to talk to police officers, right? And see what are they finding on the streets. Or maybe I'd want to go talk to somebody who does research with homeless people and see, like, are they using anything? Or maybe I'd want to go talk to treatment providers and say, hey, have you guys noticed any drugs trends or patterns? Are there any up-and-coming drugs or methods of using drugs? So these things, what Pulse is it's just this organized survey, or interview, sorry, where they go and talk to these different drug specialists or people who have close contact, like Dr. Drew might be someone they would talk to, right? Because he deals with people who are addicted. And they'll go and they'll talk to them and find out whether or not there are any patterns, emerging trends, and they'll look at these kinds of factors. Now, this is not systematic. It's based on interviews. It's not a representative sample. It's just a bunch of people that they had access to, and they'll just find information on emerging drug trends. So it's not precise because it's what somebody told me, and maybe I just happen to be talking to one person who bumped into something and another person may not have reported it, so it's not representative. It's not, that's what I mean by not systematic, but it gives me a rough idea. Just like talking to people. So they might find out who's using, like are there more people, are police officers seeing more young adults using? What's the more prevalent method? Is it injection, snorting? Is it doing drugs in combination? Who seems to be selling it? How's the price? What's the purity? That kind of thing. So this is just like keeping a pulse on what's going on in the environment. Does that make sense? I'm going to look closer also, Derek, at that chart tomorrow for Wednesday, and we can the 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 social class thing, so I can report that better. Because go ahead with your question. Oh wait, I have to turn your thing on. Sorry. Go ahead, Derek. Sorry. I don't. I don't. I think the police would. I don't know. I really don't, because I don't really know how. Here's why I can't answer that question. I know we see a lot of celebrity drug use, and they say there's a lot, but I don't know if we just think there is because we see it on TV all the time, because nobody's ever actually run a study on celebrity drug use. You know what I mean? Because you can't. Okay, go ahead. What is it called? But it was used by people in entertainment? Well, I think, well, they might interview people who come in contact with, like a researcher who may have information about like those kinds of parties or raves, or what was it, like a rave? But this was the entertainment group that you were talking about? But see, ecstasy has been around for like so long that ecstasy was probably became popular. But like maybe this phenomenon would show up in like somebody who works with people who are in treatment or people who are drug addicts, like maybe, or the police would hear about this. So they would interview the police about it. You see what I'm saying? They wouldn't go to the entertainment people, but they might interview police who could come into contact with people who are at this kind of thing and say, yeah, you know, there's this pattern. We keep seeing people going to these parties where they're dancing. That would show up in Pulse. That's that, but it wouldn't show up the way you're saying it. It would show up because the police or a researcher came across it. Or it came across, or one of these people who was involved in that, you know, ended up like, you know, either in trouble or showing up in like a rehab center where they talked to Dr. Drew. Well, not Dr. Drew, but someone like Dr. Drew. You know what I mean? But that's how they would do it. But that's the kind of thing that would probably, that they would like to know about for Pulse. So that's exactly the kind of thing that Pulse would be interested in, what you're talking about, that pattern or that trend. So that's a good example because it's something that would show up. Here, what was that called? Okay, you want to write it down so I can see what it was called? What no, what you just mentioned to me, what you just mentioned to me, I want to write that down because that's a good example of something that might show up. What was that called? The hyphy movement. And then everybody was doing ecstasy, right? Okay, thanks. Okay, we're going to go through. Do you guys have your assignments? Because we're going to do the questions. And then the next chapter we're going to do is chapter 7. Just FYI. Not now, but we'll do it Thursday. And so the test is on, I shouldn't say because I don't want to confuse, I don't remember. Is it 5? Does anyone know what chapters the test is on? I already made the test, but I just forgot. Dr. Shakib is like, I'm doing 2 classes. I do social psych on Tuesday and Thursday, and this one, and then I just forget. Do you guys know what the test 14? Okay, so we're doing 6, so 7's on there. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let me do some pods and see if you get these right. These polls. So I'm not going to tape out the whole question. I just want you to do one and just tell me what you got. So I would be looking at my questions while I'm writing this out and see if make sure you have the right answer for number 1. I do want to brush up on that stuff that I was talking about, the social class stuff, because I just forgot. So I need to look. Okay, oh, hold on one second. No. Okay. Wait, if I go like this. Okay, go ahead. Forgot to copy. Yeah, the next chapter tomorrow or Wednesday is very interesting. It's on patterns, so there'll be more stuff in there. That'll be interesting. And then what's after that? Then we have then we're going to do drug treatment and then legal drugs, but we're going to miss. I have a bunch of other stuff, but we're going to miss it because we got cut short a couple days. So there's like 3 or 4 chapters we're not going to do. It kind of stinks. Okay, so has everybody voted? I have. Okay, this one, the answer, I'm going to close it, is uniform crime reports. So you need to make sure that you get this straight. It's because he was dealing, right? So that was the sales. So that would show up in uniform crime reports. And there was no discussion of a urine sample. Okay, let's go to the next one. Make sure when you do these that you study them because for sure there'll be questions like this. Okay, there you go. Okay, I have 11. Okay, I'm going to close it so whoever's spaced out and not voting. Okay, Dawn M.E. So the majority of people got it because remember it's medical examiner. He showed up at the medical examiner's office. They found heroin in his system, so it's got to be Dawn. Right? If you have a question, ask me. Or if it's just a matter of having, I think it's just a matter of having to keep them straight in your head, but if you have a question, I want to answer it for you because I want to make sure that I can help you with something if there's something you're confusing. Okay, Here we go with 3. I worry about our chapter on legal drugs. It's so long. I have to think about what we're doing with that. I think we're going to do, well, you don't worry. I'm not going to. Six, 7, 8, 9, 10. I have 10 votes. 12 votes. One more. Okay. It's National, oh wait, I want to show you. National Household Survey. So you can look. I'm sorry, monitoring the future. Why did I say that? Sorry, right? Because it's 10th grade. Monitoring the future. So that's what I was looking at. So that was right. Most people got that correct. The key here is that, it's showing you the grade. So you can look at that. Okay, for 4. Excuse me. Okay, I need more votes. Place a vote even if you don't know, so you get credit. I have 12 votes. 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay. The answer is Adam. Everybody got it. You know why it's not Uniform Crime Reports? Because Uniform Crime Reports doesn't collect a urine sample. So the key is that they got the urine sample. Okay? That's how I remember it. Okay, let's go. So the next one is 5, right? All right, let's go to this one. They help you remember the acronyms. I have 11 votes. Oh, you know what else? Well, that would be next time. Okay, don't worry. So I have 12 votes. The answer is, if you guys see the results, this is the Dawn ER. So the majority of people got this one correct, right? Because he goes to the emergency room and he's having like a health problem. So you can look at that. If your computer freezes and you miss one, like I'll see that you did the majority of them, so I can see that you were there. But but you want to try to get every single one. But I can tell if somebody's here, if not. If they have one missing, two, like, out of 10, two missing out of 10. But if you've got like one answered, then that's going to be a problem. Okay, 6, because it shows up by your name. I get a printout of log in, log out, and activity. Okay, so Betty. Okay, so for this one, 10, 11. I have 11 votes. Please vote. 10, 11, 12. I think I'm getting 12, right? Okay, so let me close it. The answer is Adam, because she had a urine sample. Right? That's the key. So you can look at that. Okay, here we go with Bob. Going over, okay. Oh, that should have been number 7, but for some reason it came out funky. I have 8. Okay, 8, 9, 10, 11. Last call. 12, okay. Uniform crime reports, right? Because that's something they report on. Okay, hold on. You can look at the results. Most people got that right. Okay, what was that, 8? No, we're on 8. Here's 8. Okay, 9, 10, 11. Dawn ER. Yes. Dawn ER. You see it? Okay. Good job. Okay, we have this one, and then there's one more after this one that I don't think you have on paper. Okay, I need more voters. I need more voters. I need more voters. Got 10. It says that I have 13 people. 11. 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, because I think there's only 12 people here. TEDS, right? Because it's the treatment data. Okay, here's the other one. This is the last one. Okay, I have 11 votes. Oh, 12. Okay, good. Pulse. Pulse is the one where you go and talk to people who have close contact with people who are using drugs, or so you can pick up on drug trends. So that would be Pulse. Who got that right? Derek got it right. Maria and Elise. Good job. For those kind of questions, the main thing is just to review the different data sources, and you'll be able to get them right. All right, you guys, how do you feel?